A father takes his two young sons to a supervised visit. The social worker brings the children to the door. The father pulls them inside, slams the door shut, and within minutes, the house explodes in flames. Both children, ages 5 and 7, are dead. So is their father. But this isn't where our story begins. This horrific ending was just the final act in a case that had already consumed investigators for over 2 years. Because 15 years ago, on a snowy December evening in Utah, a young mother named Susan Cox Powell vanished without a trace. And just 2 weeks ago, investigative journalists made a discovery that changes everything we thought we knew about how she died. Susan Powell wasn't just another missing person. She was a 28-year-old mother of 2 who had been desperately trying to save her marriage while secretly documenting her fears that her husband might kill her. She had written a will stating, "If I die, it may not be an accident, even if it looks like one." She had recorded videos of property damage she said her husband Josh had caused during violent outbursts. She had confided to friends that she feared for her safety. On December 6, 2009, Susan attended church with her 2 young sons, Charlie and Braden. That afternoon, her neighbor Giovanna Owings came over for lunch. Josh had made pancakes. Susan told Giovanna she was tired and wanted to rest. Giovanna left around 5:30 p.m. She was the last person besides Josh Powell to ever see Susan alive. What Josh claimed happened next defied all logic. He said that after midnight, in freezing temperatures, he decided to take his 2 toddlers camping in Utah's remote West Desert. He claimed Susan stayed home because she was tired. When Susan failed to show up for work the next morning and the children didn't arrive at daycare, family members called police. Josh returned home with the boys around 5 p.m. the following day, more than 17 hours after he claimed to have left for this spontaneous camping trip. When police questioned 4-year-old Charlie about the trip, the child made a statement that would haunt investigators for years. He said his mommy had gone camping with them, but stayed behind where the crystals are. The police immediately knew something was wrong. Susan's purse, wallet, cell phone, and car keys were all at home. 2 box fans were running, pointed at a wet spot on the couch as if someone had been trying to dry up a liquid. Josh's story kept changing. He couldn't remember exactly where they had camped. He had wet socks in his van, but claimed they had been camping in the snow. But it was what police found when they searched Josh's minivan that would become the most crucial piece of evidence in the case. Hidden in a floor compartment was a garbage bag containing something investigators had never seen before in a missing person case. Inside that bag were chunks of melted metal, charred wire fragments, burned pieces of drywall, a few screws, and a screwdriver bit. The metal had been heated to such extreme temperatures that it was completely unrecognizable. The FBI analyzed it and could only confirm it was predominantly steel with traces of calcium and strontium. For 15 years, that melted metal remained one of the biggest mysteries in the case. Police theorized it might have been Susan's cell phone, a GPS device, or a computer hard drive that Josh had destroyed to cover his tracks. But they could never prove what it was, until 2 weeks ago. The Cold Podcast, an investigative series that has spent years examining the Susan Powell case, conducted an experiment that finally solved this 15-year-old mystery. And what they discovered suggests that Josh Powell didn't just destroy evidence. He destroyed what was likely the murder weapon. Here's what the Cold team figured out. In the weeks before Susan's disappearance, Josh had purchased an oxyacetylene cutting torch from an industrial supply store called Air Gas. The store employee, Andrew Robinson, remembered Josh well because his behavior had been so strange. Josh initially told Robinson he wanted the torch for making jewelry, claiming he needed to do light welding. But what he actually purchased was a heavy-duty cutting torch capable of slicing through half-inch steel. Robinson thought it was complete overkill for jewelry making. When Josh returned a week later, complaining the equipment didn't work, Robinson provided him with much larger fuel tanks. Just over a week later, Robinson saw Josh on the news as a person of interest in his wife's disappearance. Police photos taken the day after Susan vanished show the torch in Josh's garage with blackening on the tip, proving it had been used between the time he returned from his supposed camping trip and when he met with detectives. There was also a burn spot on the garage floor, a fire extinguisher nearby, and a red gas can. The cold team realized that all of Josh's power tools were accounted for in police photos and his personal pictures after Susan's disappearance, except for one. A rigid impact driver from a tool set he owned was missing, so they bought an identical impact driver from 2007 and subjected it to the same oxyacetylene torch Josh had used. After 45 minutes of intense heat, what remained looked remarkably similar to the melted metal police had found in Josh's van. But here's the crucial detail that makes this discovery so significant. The wire fragments found with the melted metal were 12 AWG copper wire, 2 to 3 inches long. That's exactly the type and length of wire found inside a rigid impact driver. The strontium detected in the metal analysis is commonly used in small electric motors, exactly like those found in cordless power tools. Andrew Robinson, the air gas employee who sold Josh the torch, didn't believe Josh had planned to destroy a power tool when he made the purchase. But the evidence suggests that's exactly what happened. And Robinson raised the terrifying possibility of why someone would go to such extreme lengths to destroy a tool. "Why would you destroy something like that?" Robinson said. "It's quite feasible that the destruction of that was involved somehow in Susan's demise." In other words, the melted metal that police found wasn't just evidence that Josh had destroyed something. It was likely evidence that he had destroyed the weapon he used to kill his wife. If this case is gripping you as much as it's gripped me, and you want to see justice for Susan and her children, make sure you're subscribed because we're about to dive into the chilling details of how Josh Powell planned this crime and the horrifying lengths he went to cover it up. This story gets darker, and the evidence gets stronger. The timeline of Josh's actions that night becomes even more damning when you understand what the evidence shows he was really doing. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. This was a calculated plan that he had been preparing for weeks. Remember, Josh bought that cutting torch on November 24, 2009. Susan disappeared on December 6th. That gave him nearly 2 weeks to plan exactly how he would destroy the evidence. The large fuel tanks he acquired when he returned to Airgas meant he had enough acetylene and oxygen to completely obliterate a metal object. But something went wrong with his plan. Police believe Josh initially tried to burn the impact driver using gasoline in his garage, which explains the burn spot on the concrete floor and the gas can found nearby. When that didn't completely destroy the tool, he switched to the cutting torch. The combination of fire and torch created the distinctive speckled gray and white appearance of the melted metal, as the tool became coated with gypsum from the burned drywall. The fact that Josh hid the melted remains in his van suggests he planned to dispose of them far from his home, somewhere police would never think to search. But he never got the chance. Police found the evidence before he could complete his plan. This revelation about the impact driver fundamentally changes our understanding of Susan's murder. It suggests this wasn't a crime of passion or a domestic dispute that got out of hand. This was premeditated murder with a calculated plan to destroy the evidence. But Josh Powell's crimes didn't end with killing his wife. What he did to his own children would shock the world and reveal the true depth of his evil. The investigation into Susan's disappearance quickly zeroed in on Josh Powell, but building a prosecutable case proved nearly impossible. Despite mountains of circumstantial evidence, prosecutors refused to file charges without a body. Detective Ellis Maxwell, who led the investigation, was frustrated by the legal constraints. "There's a pile of circumstantial evidence," Maxwell said. "Is there enough there to arrest him and book him into jail and hold him accountable?" "Absolutely there is. Could we?" "No." Meanwhile, Josh moved with the children to his father Stephen Powell's house in Washington State. This decision would prove to be another nightmare for the Cox family, because Stephen Powell was just as disturbed as his son. Stephen had developed an obsessive infatuation with Susan. He had secretly videotaped her in the bathroom using a small mirror, stolen her underwear, read her private journals, and even posted love songs about her online. After Susan's disappearance, Stephen created a website claiming she had run away with another man due to mental illness. But Stephen's obsession went beyond Susan. Police discovered he had been secretly recording young neighborhood girls and women for years. In September 2011, he was arrested on voyeurism and child pornography charges. During his trial, Stephen invoked his Fifth Amendment right when asked about Susan's disappearance, but investigators believed he knew exactly what had happened to her. The family court system, however, continued to allow Josh supervised visits with Charlie and Braden, despite the mounting evidence against him and his father's arrest. Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy Cox, fought desperately for custody, but the court seemed to prioritize Josh's parental rights over the children's safety. In early 2012, new evidence emerged that would finally force the court's hand. A laptop from Josh Powell's Utah home contained images of cartoon pornography. A judge then ordered Josh Powell to undergo a psychosexual evaluation and take a polygraph test. Josh knew his time was running out. The evidence was mounting. The courts were finally taking action, and his carefully constructed lies were falling apart. So he made one final, unthinkable decision. On February 5, 2012, a social worker brought Charlie and Braden to Josh's rental house in Graham, Washington, for what was supposed to be a supervised visit. The boys, now 5 and 7 years old, were excited to see their father. They had no idea what he was planning. The moment the social worker brought the children to the door, Josh pulled them inside and slammed it shut, locking her out. She could smell gasoline almost immediately and began pounding on the door, screaming for the children. Within minutes, the house exploded in flames. The official cause of death for Joshua and the 2 boys was determined to be carbon monoxide poisoning, though the coroner also noted that both children had significant chopping injuries on the head and neck. A hatchet was recovered near Joshua's body, and investigators believe he used the tool to attack the boys before being overwhelmed by smoke and fumes. Josh had attacked his own children with a hatchet, then ignited gasoline throughout the house to ensure none of them would survive. This case shows us how the system can fail the most vulnerable victims. If you believe children deserve better protection from dangerous parents, hit that like button and share this story. Charlie and Braden's deaths led to important legal changes, but only because people refused to let their story be forgotten. The murder-suicide sent shockwaves through both Washington and Utah. We have been robbed of 3 precious lives, and it's just devastating to think the same person did it, Denise Cox Ernest, Susan Powell's sister, told ABC affiliate Como TV in 2012. But the Cox family refused to let their tragedy be in vain. They sued Washington State's Child Welfare Agency for negligence in allowing the supervised visits to continue despite the obvious danger Josh posed. They won a roughly $100 million lawsuit against Washington's State Child Welfare Agency after accusing agency leadership and staff of negligence. More importantly, their advocacy led to legislative changes designed to protect other children. In 2024, the Utah legislature passed HB 272, commonly called Ohm's Law, to reform the state's family court system. The law now requires courts to consider evidence of domestic violence and other forms of abuse when making child custody decisions. The case has continued to generate new insights and evidence even 15 years later. The Cold podcast has spent years investigating every aspect of Susan's disappearance, uncovering previously unreported evidence and interviewing key witnesses who had never spoken publicly before. Because forensic interviews are audio and video recorded, those recordings may be used as evidence in criminal prosecutions rather than forcing a child to testify in open court. The podcast has also revealed how Charlie Powell's statements to police provided crucial clues about where Susan's body might be located. Charlie had told investigators that his mother was where the crystals are, leading to extensive searches in Utah's Dugway geode beds and Topaz Mountain area. In early 2022, a cave exploration crew, led by Diesel Brothers personality Dave Sparks, took up the challenge of searching a mine shaft in the Utah desert in search of Susan's remains. The team discovered several rib bones, possible human vertebrae, scraps of clothing, and other possible evidence of human remains in the mine shaft. The remains were sent to a lab, with DNA tests concluding that none of the bones belonged to Powell, but were instead animal remains. Despite these continued search efforts, Susan's body has never been found. West Valley City Police closed their active investigation into Susan's disappearance in May 2013, stating their belief that Joshua killed Susan and that his brother Michael, who died by suicide in February 2013, aided him in concealing her body. Stephen Powell, Josh's father, died in custody in 2020 while serving time for his voyeurism convictions, taking whatever secrets he knew about Susan's fate to his grave. The recent identification of the melted impact driver represents the most significant breakthrough in the case in over a decade. It provides the missing piece of the puzzle about how Susan was killed and demonstrates the calculated nature of Josh's crime. This case serves as a stark reminder of how domestic violence can escalate to murder and how the legal system's failure to act decisively can have devastating consequences. Susan Powell tried to protect herself and document the danger she faced. She left behind evidence of her fears and Josh's controlling behavior, but it wasn't enough to save her or her children. The Susan Powell case changed how we think about domestic violence, child custody, and the warning signs of escalating abuse. If this story has affected you, please share it to keep Susan's memory alive and help protect other families facing similar dangers. Every share could help save a life. Today, Susan would have been 43 years old, Charlie would be 19, and Braden would be 17. Instead, their lives were cut short by a man who chose violence over accountability, murder over divorce, and revenge over love. Susan Powell's story doesn't end with her disappearance. It lives on in the laws that now protect children, the investigators who refuse to give up, and the family who continues to seek justice. Her case reminds us that behind every missing person statistic is a real person with hopes, dreams, and people who love them. The search for Susan Powell may be cold, but it will never be forgotten.